Ahmadlotfygomaa is an Egyptian patriot, essayist, author, and barrister. He studied law and became one of Egypt's most famous lawyers and public speakers. He was a member of the prestigious Arab Academy of Damascus. He spoke Arabic, English, French and Italian. He also had a profound knowledge of hieroglyphic and Latin. Early life and education. Goumah was born in Alexandria, the second biggest city in Egypt, then under the British occupation. His father was the Honorable Syed Goumah Abul Khair, a descendant of Prophet Muhammad, his mother Khadija Mahmoud al-Sonbati, an Egyptian lady of Egyptian, Turkish and French ancestors. His mother couldn't breastfeed, and he was breastfed by Malokid, the mother of the famous Arab music composer Syed Darwish. His family moved to the city of Tanta, where he joined the Coptic school. His family then moved him to the Prince's School, where he finished his primary education in 1900. He joined the Khedive's School, where he finished his secondary education in 1903. His mother died in 1903 and Goumah traveled to Beirut and joined the American College in Beirut to study philosophy. He returned to Egypt and worked as a schoolteacher at the Helwyn Primary School, until late 1907, when he acquired his baccalaureate. He joined the Khedive's Law School in 1908 to earn a degree in law but was expelled after a speech he made in the 40th day death anniversary of Mustafa Kemal. He left to France and joined the law school of Lyon University and studied law under the famous French scholar Édouard Lamberton after acquiring his Ph.D. in late 1912. Goumah returned to Egypt and started his career as a lawyer, teaching. Loutfi Goumah taught through two periods of his life. The first period was at the Helwyn Primary School. Among his students were Abdul Rahman Azam and Abdul Rahman Al-Soy, the Faculty of Engineering first dean. The second period was in 1917 when he taught criminal law at the Cairo University. Influence. Goumah started writing articles against the British occupation in Egypt through Al-Zahar newspaper since early 1905, yet a speech he made during the celebration of the coronation of the Khedive Abbas II of Egypt, in which he explained the détente policy between England and France and blamed the Khedive for supporting the British occupation's interests, annoyed the Khedive, and he was soon expelled from Al-Zahar. He went off to join Mustafa Kemal as an editor for the Egyptian Standard along with Charles Rudy and William Maloney. Since then, Goumah wrote in tens of periodicals and newspapers, accumulating thousands of articles. He wrote extensively in Al-Ahram, Al-Bala, Al-Zahar, Al-Bala Weekly, Al-Bayan, Al-Moktabast. His articles covered many aspects of the Egyptian life during that era, ranging from economics, international politics, political philosophy to literature, literary criticism and Sufism. Goumah raised in his articles subjects that were addressed in Egypt and other Arab countries decades after his death. He called for free education at Al-Bala in May 1930, nearly 2 decades before Taha Hussein, then the Egyptian Minister of Education, started implementing it. In 1933, he criticized in his novel Aida the Egyptian personal status laws for giving only men the right for divorce. The same law Goumah refused to adopt when getting married by offering his wife equal rights regarding divorce. It was only in 2001 when the Egyptian personal status law accommodated a method by which women may divorce in compliance with Islamic Sharia. He wrote in Al-Rabayta al-Arabiya in 1938 criticizing polygamy and called for strict regulations to control it. Goumah's interpretation of Islamic scripture didn't contradict, in his opinion, with his views regarding his firm support to the feminist ideologies, nor did it contradict with his dedicated interest in metaphysics, Sufism and spiritualism, subjects that are still looked upon with skepticism among Orthodox Muslim scholars. According to Anwar al-Jundi, the Islamic thinker and author, Goumah represents the soul of the moderate school with a clear affiliation and belief in the Orient, Islam and Egypt. Political activity. Nationalism. In 1906 and during a vacation in Lausanne, Switzerland, Goumah was introduced to Mustafa Kemal and Mohammed Ferhat, the founders of the Egyptian National Party and famous Egyptian patriots. Kemal and Ferhat were touring Europe head-hunting for editors for the Egyptian Standard, their new newspaper. Goumah was intrigued by the charisma of Mustafa Kemal and joined the Egyptian National Party, having believed in Mustafa Kemal's cause. Congress of the Jeunesse Égyptienne, Geneva, 1909. During his university years in France, Goumah continued his political activities by forming student groups, writing speeches and corresponding with different political figures in Europe, who were known for their support and sympathy for the Egyptian cause against the British occupation. He participated in 3 conferences held in Geneva, Brussels and Paris in 1909, 1910, 1911 respectively. Wilfred Skywind Blunt. One of the figures Goumah corresponded with during his residence in Europe was the English poet Wilfred Skywind Blunt, who was known for his support to the Egyptian cause and for his support to Ahmed Arabi, the Egyptian nationalist who revolted against the Khedive, Tewfik. Blunt was also a friend of famous Egyptian Grand Mufti Muhammad Abdu, of which Goumah was a disciple. Abdu used to say that Blunt is just a noble Englishman who is loyal to Egypt, the Arabs, Islam and humanity. Goumah traveled to Britain to consult with Blunt on political issues in August 1909 and spent the night at his estate, New Buildings. He also received a copy of a speech to be read on Blunt's behalf for the Congress in Geneva. Goumah kept the relationship with Blunt until Blunt's death in 1922. The West Sussex Record Office has records for 203 letters between Goumah and Blunt, addressing Keir Hardie, Thomas Kettle, the Irish journalist, barrister and MP in the House of Commons of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, recorded in his book The Day's Burden, Studies, Literary and Political -1910, p. 112. This incident. The Egyptian National Conference, Brussels, 1910. In 1910, Aristide Briand, then the Prime Minister and Minister of Interior of France, summoned Goumah. Mohammed Ferhat and Hamd El Ali lied to his office and informed him that the French authorities were reluctant to host the Egyptian National Conference on French soil. He suggested Switzerland or Luxembourg as valid alternatives. Both Goumah and Ferhat expressed their disappointment. They also complained about being followed by British Secret Service agents in France, a complaint that was denied by Briand, claiming that they imagined seeing the Brits everywhere. The Egyptian National Conference was held in Brussels on the 22nd of September 1910 and a book was issued recording its event. Ouvres du Congrès National Égyptien tenu Brussels le 22, 23 et 24 September, Bruges, 1911. Indians in exile. During his years in France, Goumah got in contact with many Indian patriots in exile. Some were members of the India House, others were from the Paris Indian Society. Among them were Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, Virendranath Chattopadhyaya, Hardayal, Shyamji Krishna Varma and Bakaiji Karma, who were known for sympathizing with the Egyptian cause. Goumah tried to resolve the conflict between Madame Karma and Krishna Varma. Meeting Gandhi on 7 September 1931, Goumah boarded the SS Rajputana in Port Said to meet with Mahatma Gandhi. The meeting lasted for 8 hours. Legal career. The Armin Osman case in 1912. Having returned from France, Goumah passed the bar examination that was focused entirely on his knowledge of Islamic Sharia and Islamic inheritance jurisprudence, and in 1915 he was appointed as a lawyer in front of the Egyptian Appeals Court. Goumah has been appointed as the defense lawyer for some of the most famous cases known to the Egyptian society at the time, including the Listak murder case, the bombs case and the Armin Osman murder case, in which he represented Ahmed Wasim Khalid and Muhammad Anwar al-Sadat. Goumah mentioned in his memoirs the trial of Anwar al-Sadat, then an army officer, and others, in the murder case of Egypt's Minister of Finance Amin Osman. The defendants, which Goumah referred to as the boys, refused to get into a cage that was designed not to allow any physical contact with them. Islamic philosophy and Sufism. During his high school years at the Khedives School, Goumah studied Arabic literature, metaphysics and philosophy under Sheikh Untitled, the famous Islamic scholar and Egypt's Nobel Prize nominee, and the author of the Jewels in Interpreting the Holy Quran. Gowari introduced him to Islamic philosophy and spiritualism. He then corresponded with Sheikh Muhammad Abdi, the Grand Mufti of Egypt, and eventually became one of his disciples. Two of Goumah's letters to the Grand Mufti at the age of 18 were published in Rashid Rider's book on Muhammad Abba, with Rashid commenting on one of them. Both Gowari and Abdi were icons of enlightenment, and they both became pillars of Goumah's intellectual structure. He wrote many articles and books discussing, debating, defining and recording the lives of famous Islamic philosophers and Sufis. His book, History of Islamic Philosophers in the East and West, is considered one of the finest references written on the subject to date. Al-Shahab asked in June 1926. A group of Al-Azhar scholars visited Goumah in his office asking him to sue Taha Hussein for writing his controversial book Pre-Islamic Poetry. Goumah, who has not read the book, ordered a copy, and after reading what Taha Hussein has written and the philosophical argument he adopted in his book, Goumah refused to sue Hussein, but rather decided to write a book that defies Hussein's philosophical approach. The book, whose name was derived from a Quranic verse in Surat al-Jinn that may literally mean the monitoring comet, Arabic pronounced Al-Shahabarast, became Goumah's most famous work. In Pre-Islamic Poetry, Hussein claimed using Descartes' methodic doubt process to analyze pre-Islamic scripture, poetry and prose. He concluded that most, if not all, what was claimed to be pre-Islamic is in fact written after Islam for political and tribal reasons. Goumah based his argument on a technical philosophical approach. He debated the flows in the derivations concluded by Hussein on pure academic grounds by re-explaining the methods of Descartes. He then supported his argument with historical, linguistic and social facts. The tides against Hussein's book grew higher and higher, and eventually Hussein removed the 4 sections of his book that were taken against him in, renamed the book Pre-Islamic Literature. Louis Massignon and Al-Hallaj, having written a few articles in Al-Rabayt al-Arabiya magazine in 1937 about Al-Hallaj, Goumah was called on by Louis Massignon, the famous French Orientalist, at Goumah House in Heliopolis to discuss Al-Hallaj. Their meetings and correspondences continued until Goumah's death in 1953. Massignon was particularly interested in a book Goumah was writing about Al-Hallaj, yet died without finishing it. Death. Goumah died suffering from the complications of a brain infarction on 15 June, 1953. His memoirs. Goumah started recording his diaries in 1909. It suffered periods of discontinuity that may sometimes reach several months, after which he would resume writing. He has written a long introduction that covers the period from his birth to the date he started writing the memoirs. Augusta Philippovna Damaski. Goumah's memoirs were printed in 2000 in 2 books. The first was published under the title, Ahmadlotfygomaa, Witness to an Era. The second, released in 1999, reveals Goumah's love story with Russian author and essayist Augusta Damaski, under the title, Memoirs of Youth, the anniversary of March 19, in which complete sections of his diaries, in addition to a set of letters sent by Augusta to Loutfi Goumah, were included. In his memoirs, Goumah reveals the story of an emotional platonic relationship that lasted for nearly 4 years with Augusta. They toured throughout Europe together, and he recorded the evolution of their relationship in a chapter in his diaries called the March 19th Anniversary. He dedicated his translation of The Prince by Machiavelli to her. He wrote a play called The Woman's Heart about her, and used a pseudonym, clearly derived from her name, to write some articles in the weekly magazine, The Arab Association, in 1930. And in 1939 he published some of her letters addressed to him, claiming they were addressed to a poet named a name Augusta addressed him within her letters. Controversy about the memoirs. When published, the memoirs raised controversy among critics, some of whom praised it for the amount of details it included about the political, literary and cultural aspects of life in Egypt. Others directed a scathing criticism to the views Goumah displayed therein. They criticized its subjective style and its obvious pessimism, a bitterness with which Goumah referred to some literary and political figures of his time. It was also criticized for being subjected to heavy editing, prohibiting certain periods from publication, and its poor arrangement. Also, the memoirs were criticized for extracting parts of it to be published in separate books, like Goumah's relationship with Augusta or Goumah's relationship with the French Orientalist Louis Massignon, which is published in a book titled His Unpublished Work. A number of scholars went through the manuscripts of Goumah's unpublished work, led by his son Rabi, who filed, arranged, collected and printed many of them. Goumah's unpublished manuscripts were mostly in the form of notebooks or papers. Dr. Ahmad Hussein al-Tamaway, Egyptian author and writer, along with Dr. Syed Ali Ismail of Al-Minya University and Dr. Ibrahim Awad of Ain Shams University, revised many of Goumah's manuscripts, adding footnotes, identifying the different historical characters mentioned in Goumah's works. They also made literary critique for some of his plays. His most famous literary works: Studies Renaissance in Italy 1911, History of Social Science 1919, Plato's Banquet 1920, The Monitoring Comet 1926, History of Islamic Philosophers in the East and West 1927, Life of the Orient, Its Countries, People, Past and Present 1932, Revolution of Islam and the Hero of Prophets 1939, Blessed Days in Holy Lands 1940, Memoirs of Youth, The Anniversary of March 19, Modern Revision of the Holy Quran, Novels and Short Stories in the Homes of People 1904, In the Valley of Concerns 1904, The Nights of the Confused Soul 1912, The Fair Young Man 1930, The Embryo 1930, For the Sake of Life and Death 1931, Ida 1932, After Repention 1932, Orat Alain 1934, Korlinko and E-Vagina 1937, Muktara 1941, Plays Nero 1919, The Stolen Heritage 1932, The Death of Al-Hallaj 1942, Translations The Liberation of Egypt 1906, The Immortal Magician 1906, The Oriental Wisdom 1912, The Prince 1912, Ulysses 1947,